Welcome to yet another episode of Shortcast Over Coffee. Today, my guest is Krish Ashok. Ashok has been a part of the show earlier, where we spoke at length about food, homeopathy, veganism, and Carnatic music. And I highly recommend you check the episodes out. I link them in the show notes. Ashok recently made a food trip to Lucknow, and I thought I need to ask him in detail about the Mughal and the Awadhi dishes he tried there. So here we are. Like most of my episodes, we do digress quite a bit, but I really hope the episode is both engaging and entertaining as we talk about Lucknow, the city, and how the Mughals influenced Indian cooking. So let's now get right into it. Hi, Ashok. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the first time I'm using the word welcome back because you've been a guest on the show before. Last time we spoke about food, homeopathy, music, and I would like to talk to you about your recent travel experiences. I heard you went to Lucknow recently. How was that? What was that for? Was it a food trip?
It was primarily a food trip, pretty much, right? I mean, I think one of those few places like Calcutta, which we essentially picked merely just to go eat as much different kinds of food as possible. Although in Calcutta, we actually ended up eating lots of different kinds of food. And in Lucknow, we found ourselves eating just one kind of food over and over and again, but it was still amazing, right? So I think primarily just for food. Yes.
Yeah, I've watched YouTube videos of Delhi food walks, I think it's called. So the guy goes to different cities and has like a local guide, and they take him to different food experiences. Was that the case?
It was, at least on one day. So I did have somebody who follows me on Instagram who took me around, who actually happened to be a master chef contestant as well. So he really knew his way around, and a lot of the other chefs everywhere kind of knew him because he was popular from TV, and so they would give us the sort of the off-menu stuff and so on. So I think it was quite fantastic. Yeah, so it took us to all of the non-tourist trap-based places as well, at least the Chaat and the Kababs and so on. Yes.
Yeah, interesting. You talk about Calcutta and Lucknow, and I think there is a huge debate of how potato found its way in biryani. I think is potato part of Awadh type biryani as well, or is it only Calcutta?
No, it isn't. It isn't. It's very much a later addition in Calcutta. Well after, I think, the Awadhi food reached Calcutta, and that's sort of like the base of the Mughlai cuisine in Bengal. There's very distinctly, there is a Bengali food and there is a Mughlai food in Bengal, and I think. And there is obviously the Indo-Chinese. So these are the three sort of big pillars. And then there's lots of, obviously, like the British era bakeries and, places that make cakes and omelets and those kinds of things. And there's also your vegetarian sort of Jain Marwadi style sort of food, puri bhaji sort of thing in the morning and so on, right? So that's Calcutta. But I think, Lucknow, obviously, I think the Awadhi cuisine itself sort of is very much a very a regal royal kind of a thing. The Awadh rulers were generally huge patrons of food, and more importantly, also keen on making that food available to everyone as well, right? So they would set up these soup kitchens equivalent, right? And they would serve biryani. And there is this urban myth that the dum cooking style evolved as a response to the fact that the Nawab wanted to serve hot food to people, and that was practically hard, right? I mean, if you had to sort of serve food to everyone, you can't like be running a live kitchen all the time. And the idea of something that would just slowly cook in its very low heat over a long period of time and stay hot and fresh all the time was something that
right?
Apparently, dum sort of cooking,
Cooked.
right? Cook in its own juices, in its own smoke, and so on. Yeah.
And
from all directions.
Yeah. I mean, there's this debate about how biryani found its way, and there are two different stories. One is that the last emperor of Awadh was, I think, the British sort of threw him off the chair, and he made his way to Calcutta, and then
Calcutta,
British,
yes, Wajid Ali Shah, yes,
Wajid Ali Shah, and then he and British sort of brought out this narrative that he was poor and he couldn't afford meat, and then he had to use
Yes.
potato. And apparently that's
Yes.
not actually true.
Not entirely. So as I found out, that I think that is one story. I think so. Let's put it this way. I think he was definitely not as rich as he was when he was the ruler of Awadh. But clearly, I think he could have probably stayed pretty comfortable if he had lived within his means and so on, right? I mean, I think he had expensive taste, to be fair.
Yeah.
Right. So compared to his own regal self, maybe technically, yes, a poorer Nawab in that sense. And yeah, it's not impossible that that they might have probably perhaps tried to cut down on meat and so on. But yes, but I think the more practical reason is probably that I think there was a certain novelty to the use of potato when it was introduced by those people there. And I think at that point of time, I think these guys were keen on sort of, being the who's who and the elite of that society. And I think adding potato to these things sort of made it a new novel thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's actually fascinating how the Awadh cooking style and Mughlai cooking style are kind of related. Because
Yep.
from what I've heard, by the decline of the Mughal Empire, a lot of these cooks made
Yes.
their way to Awadh and Hyderabad and
Absolutely.
so on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, they were vassals of the Mughals, right? I mean, it's usually some sort of distant cousin, somebody who are not in line for the throne, right, in Delhi or Agra, would be sent off to become like the Nawab of the Mughal sort of the Nawab was actually a title that was used as the sort of like a vassal of the Mughal, right? Not the emperor himself, right? So not the Shahenshah, if you will, right? So and so you had like the Nawab of Bengal, and you had like the Nizam of Hyderabad and the Nawab of Awadh and so on. All of these were vassals of the British, of the Mughals, and then essentially over time, I think as Delhi became weak, they just declared independence and sort of became their own, grabbed their own territories, as did Hyderabad, as did Awadh, as did Bengal, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. I saw a lot of stories of kebabs, kakori kebab, shami kebab, and all of that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I had this very curious question that were you raised a vegetarian, and when did you start eating meat, and was it difficult for you to start eating meat? Because there is this, at least I have this where, whenever I trying things, because I never grew up eating meat, there is this,
Yes.
I think it's quite an acquired taste, right? So tell me that story.
It is. There are two layers to this. Of course, it is difficult, but it's made difficult not just for the simple neurogastronomic reason of finding unfamiliar textures harder to get used to. That's, I think, only one part of the story, right? The second part of the story clearly is the moral and ethical superiority we attach to vegetarianism, and more importantly, the disgust associated with meat, at least by people who are vegetarians in India, is also unique to India, right? I mean, I think so it's different in the West. So people who are vegetarians or vegans and so on, they probably grew up eating meat, and then they said, "Now, you know what? It's unsustainable, it's unethical, and I want to be healthy, eat healthy, and so on." And they sort of switched over to a plant-based diet and so on. But barring the few idiots on social media, nobody's like saying meat is disgusting and so on. But saying meat is disgusting is like a very central part of, I would say, 30% of India's population, right? And it is disallowed in religious contexts. It's disallowed, and yeah. So I mean, you don't find Christianity, Islam, or Judaism or Buddhism is again comes from India, so you can find that they do have that thing, right? So it's strange that China, as meat heavy as it is, right? The Buddhist places are still vegetarian, right? And you can see that sort of where it originated. It originated in India, right? And where this idea of somehow meat is impure, right, is sort of like a very strong thing, at least for the last 1,400 years. So yeah, so that sort of makes it hard. But I think, again, as I said, I when I got introduced to meat, I was in Delhi, there's no better place, and Delhi is very similar to Lucknow in many places. I mean, it's the same Mughal food, and my college was in Kashmiri Gate, which is inside the old Delhi, the walls of old Delhi, and very right next to Chandni Chowk and Jama Masjid, and all of those places that still had restaurants that essentially claimed that, well, the chef is descended from the chefs. who used to cook for Akbar or used to cook for
there is a
Shah
bit
Jahan
of
and so on.
history that
Yeah.
I think that area or around that area was called Shah Jahanabad, and then it changed to
Yes.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the 7 cities of Delhi, right? I mean, right, all the way from your Hastinapura, Indraprastha, and then you have your
Lodi slave
Mehroli,
dynasty.
right? So the Mehroli, which is sort of where the slave dynasty, Qutbuddin Aibak and so on, and then you had the Lodi gardens and that part of the city, and then you had the Humayun's city, and then you had Shah Jahan's city as the last one, right? Yeah.
So that's where you got introduced. Was it like?
Yes.
You were fine.
No, in the sense that, I mean, well, so it was difficult to start with, and obviously, I think the most friendliest of things to start with is usually chicken, right? And and it took much longer for me to get used to things like seafood or red meat and so on. And in fact, it wasn't until I went to the US that I then kind of got used to pretty much everything, right? I mean, yeah. So you get everything everywhere. So India is weird in the sense that you actually don't get all meat everywhere. Right? It's like, so if you're not going to get pork inside, the walls of the Red Fort, right? In the old city of Delhi, which is again, predominantly a Muslim place. You're not going to get beef in many parts, many cities of North India and so on, right? In fact, the only place where you can generally walk around and in 500 meters eat every possible species human beings eat is probably Kerala and a few parts of like Tamil Nadu. That's pretty much it. Or Calcutta, right? But even again, Calcutta, it'll depend, right? The Mughlai places are not going to serve pork. And so on, but the Chinese place as well, right? And yeah, so India always has these. So food is like so central to identity in India, right? In a way, it is not in the US. So in the sense, when I was living in the US, it was just, yeah, I mean, you could just pick a cuisine, you could go, and that the menu itself will have, well, there is a chicken menu, there's a seafood menu, there's a red meat menu, and there's like everything, right? Yeah.
And then like 2 vegetarian options.
Yeah, and like 2 vegetarian options, or as many vegetarians eventually figured out, is to pick the most interesting looking meat dish and then say do it without the meat. That's usually a better way to eat more interesting food, because the natively vegetarian options will be just simply terrible. Yeah,
I've had this conversation with people who have tried the novel concepts like Impossible Burger and Impossible Meat, and the reason why. What they say that they don't like it is that the reason why they chose not to eat meat was different from an American. So an American loves the taste of beef, but for environmental reasons, they don't.
They don't, yeah, yes.
But Indians don't have an acquired taste for it. And now you're serving
because
the
you've been
same
told,
exact
because
taste.
because you've been told as a child that it's disgusting. That, and therefore it smells bad. And you've been told those kinds of things all the time, right? And so therefore... So as far back as 20 years ago, I find vegetarians being disappointed by the fact that the veggie burger that Burger King did introduce like 20 years ago, which was made of a mock meat soy thing, which had a sort of like a vaguely rubbery, chickeny kind of taste, didn't even taste like beefy or anything. And they were like, this tastes terrible, right? Because I think they expected an aloo tikki inside, right? And in a sense, I think it's more fundamental in the sense that I think the taste of protein is not something that I think Indian vegetarians are fans of. It's as simple as that, right? So it's nothing to do with meat. You try give them soy granules and they say this tastes like cardboard. Yes, of course, because the most delicious form of protein is like eggs or chicken or crustaceans and so on, and you don't like that. So clearly, plant-based protein, which is isolated, is going to taste pretty bad. So I think it's almost like vegetarians just need their carbs in India. I think this is what I think.
Yes. Okay, yeah.
So everywhere else, the formula for burger is carbs, protein, carbs. Veggie burger in India is carbs, deep fried carbs, and carb.
Mekalu tikki and so on, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So coming back to Lucknow and Kababs, what are some of the things you tried and what was your favorite?
Oh, I think it was so hard to choose. I think every restaurant ended up being better than the other. Overall, I'm sort of inclined towards the Shami kebab purely for the fact that I have a bias against very soft textures. I like a little bit of a little bit of crunch, a little bit of textural variation, and so on. The Galavati kebab is just literally just melt in your mouth, which is fine, which is amazing, right? But
there's a bit of history around that as well, right?
Yes. The myth around that essentially being the fact that there was this Nawab who didn't have teeth and so on, which incidentally, by the way, apparently a lot of historians question that too, right? Saying that that's highly unlikely that there was that he managed to do this because he didn't have teeth or anything. But I think the more interesting explanation is the fact that amongst the Persianized elites, which is sort of basically everyone from Uzbekistan, Iran, Afghanistan, that these are all Persianized. They considered Persian to be the court language and so on, right? And so for the longest time. So the Persianized elite apparently have a thing against sounds being made when you eat. So it was considered specially bad manners if you could hear people eat. And so they disproportionately had a preference for creamy, richer, softer textures because they basically just made less sound when you ate them. And so it's natural. That's probably an outcome of that rather than, a toothless Nawab and all of and attributing the fact that, he played a role in inventing this and so on. But yeah, so my preference was shabi kebab, which I think the mincemeat along with the onions and chilies and the other spices kind of made it had a little bit more texture than this, right? And than the Galavati itself, right? And the kakori basically sort of like a sausage, if you will, right? It's just shaped like that, but had the texture of a shabi kebab, right? And kakori is just a town just outside Lucknow, right? And so lots of these things that are named in Lucknow, which are like sort of nearby towns, right? Your Moradabadi biryani, like for example, is Moradabad is right outside, right? And so on. So I think, so I prefer the shabi kebab for the most part. And I've always felt that I think it probably would make amongst the most flavorful burger patties, right? I think there's something to be said by that. I don't know why they would not just somebody would not start. Preferably in the US, like an Indianized burger chain with just like the shabi kebab inside, right? And actually, Indians could probably make some really fantastic veggie patties as well, right?
I'm surprised why there isn't an Indianized version of fast food. I mean, I had this question to
there is no. I think the SFOs in the New York cities have like these dosa, taco, crepe type places now, and a few. I think the taco, naan, pizza type sort of crossovers and so on.
Yeah, there's like a naan which is like
a naan which,
like a kati roll company.
Correct. And there's also, I think, the desi pizzas, I think, have now become sort of like a base. Right? Your chicken tikka pizza and so on. Yeah. But I think the other way around, meaning that where it's still an American template, but the flavor profiles and inside, it's like tandoori mayo, and you have all of those other usual better pickled sirke wali pyaz, as opposed to just that stupid raw onion that they give you in the burger and so on, would all really elevate a burger. And today you can get those sort of burgers in these experimental hi-fi, Brooklyn kind of, hipster Indian places or whatever it is, or in SFO and so on. But, this could actually be sort of the sort of thing that I think your ubiquitous Indian buffet type places in the US where the order of dishes is the same all across the US, right? It starts with this mango lassi thing, and it starts with one of these, and there'll be always this pakoda or a samosa there, and then there'll be this giant tandoori chicken sitting somewhere, and there'll be a dal, and it's the same thing everywhere. Yes.
Yeah, it is the same thing. I think some of the outlets like In-N-Out and Shake Shack have gone a level up. They started serving caramelized onions and a bit more innovation where they don't have any freezers and all of that.
Yes. And I think they do a lot more interesting things with the fries and double fry. It's really good. So those are really sort of good. And I think that the smashed burger, 2 layers of patties, I think that actually makes it more texturally interesting. But at the end of the day, it's also burgers, like the quintessential American comfort food, right? I mean, it's just in the sense that if you get used to eating burgers, I think a bad burger is okay too, right? I mean, it's like the dal chawal of it's very hard to mess up a dal chawal, right? I mean, there's nothing to it, right? And it'll taste comforting as long as you get the salt right. I think you're fine.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the basis behind choosing Lucknow? Was it a random choice, or something you read about and you always wanted to go?
Yeah, so I think as a food city, it's one of those places I had not been to, and ever since I think the last time I did some place in UP was Varanasi. I think I had to take my mother for some religious reason, and so we decided to sort of salvage from all of the religious nonsense by at least eating some good food, right? Eating all of the chaat and amazing things in Varanasi. And Varanasi, mind you, is sort of, again, right, the central part of Varanasi is very much a vegetarian place, right? So there's no because of all the ghats and the stuff. Of course, I think you could, of course, still get meat in nearby the your that Gyanvapi mosque and other things, which again, right now it's a communally sensitive area. I think the mosque is right next to the Kashi Vishwanath temple, right? So the mosque has been locked up because just to prevent any further damage from happening, and so on. So that's like, so we kind of stuck to vegetarian food for the most part because my mother was there and so on. But I think Lucknow was always something that we wanted to do, right? As the place to eat kebabs, right? And the fact that I think that you could just take one of those Shami or Galavati kebabs, they would serve this most astonishing. I think the most underrated thing to eat in Lucknow is the way they make Rumali Roti. I've never liked Rumali Roti till I ate it at Lucknow. I'm like, wow, this is the perfect vehicle for kebabs. Because it's so thin, it's like a cloth, it doesn't dry up, and it's done so beautifully. You could just sort of, a kebab, the onions inside, that pungent hit, and it's like a tiny small meal instead of ordering an oily bowl of some sabji and some butter naan or something. I think this is like a fantastic way. It's on the street, just one Rumali folded roti, 2 kebabs, and a plate full of onions, right? I think, and the onions there are slightly less pungent, and they cut them in a certain way that I think also they cut them thinner than they do in other parts of other cities I've seen. So it's sort of, the onion actually is a lot less pungent, but still maintains a little bit of that sort of crunch. That was like really lovely. Yes.
Do they make Rumali Roti any differently, or is it just that same inverted kadai and then?
Yeah, it is the inverted kadai, but I think what the chef who accompanied me told me is that for any chef who comes out of Lucknow, I think mastering the Rumali Roti is like a rite of passage, right? Because you can, if it's too thick, it feels doughy and heavy, and if you roll it too thin, it becomes like papad, and you don't want that. So somehow it has to be like a rumal, and it has to sort of, when you hold it, it has to sort of feel like a cloth. Not like a papad. It can't be hard, and it should not be heavy and doughy as well, right? So getting that thinness right and the temperature right, I think is like, takes a specific skill, which I think they've sort of mastered. Even Delhi does not make as nice Rumali rotis as Lucknow does.
Fantastic. Yeah. So other than kebabs and Rumali Roti, you mentioned about chaats. I saw a story about basket chaat. Tell me more about that.
Oh man, that was so I think this is a sort of famous chef. I forget his name. He runs this famous cafe in I think the old part of town in Lucknow, and he's said to have invented this basket chaat. So I think a better name for it is the kitchen sinks chaat. Basically, it's like throw the kitchen sink at it, right? It's basically everything that goes into every chaat, a little bit of that goes into this basket. They do not mess around. I mean, it is not something a single person can eat. It's, you order one and the entire family eats, right? So it's got the deep fried potato, it's got the dahi balla, it's got the aloo tikki, it's got the sprouted moong, and then it's there in this basket, and there is all of the pomegranate and all of the other chutneys and the spices. It is easily 1,500 calories, right? And it's got dahi on top, right? And so it is, but it is absolutely delicious, right? So it's just so many textures, and so on. So the basket chaat, but in general, even the chaat there itself, like the palak patta chaat, for example, like, it's so nice, the layering, the crispness, and more interestingly, the use of very thinly sliced radish as a garnish. And in winter, they use the radish leaves as garnish. And it adds an amazing, mild, wasabi, peppery sort of hit, which again, radish, horseradish, same family. So it has that same allyl isothiocyanate. So, and it's an amazing addition to chaat. Now, I was wondering, why could we not do that in Chennai? Because you kind of get radish all through the year. And the interesting thing is that the radish in the south is like insanely pungent. So it's not something you can eat that raw that easily. Whereas
that's what I was wondering. Yeah, it can be a turn off, completely.
It's a turn off, right? But there, no, it's very mild and it's just amazing, right? So radish as a garnish, oh wow. I mean, it is thoroughly underrated, and it's something that I found, in every chart in Lucknow. And in Delhi, normally they do that in winters.
Interesting. Yeah. Again, Varanasi also has this Daulat ka chaat, also called as Makhan Malai. And it's incredible how they used to do it before the times of refrigeration, right? And I had this, I was reading this article where kulfi and matka kulfi was also invented during the Mughal time, where they used to bury it inside sand and all of that. It was quite fascinating.
Yes. I mean, it's a lot of the, I think a lot of engineering went into figuring out ways to remove heat from things in a place that is fundamentally warm, right? And you do that via condensation, through capillary action, and a bunch of these other physics principles that you figure out, that you put it inside these pots, like water in pots sort of stays cool because, it's going through those pores, evaporating, and then evaporative cooling, right? I mean, it's and so on. So you do these things, and then they actually used to procure ice from the Himalayas, and then about 30-40% of it would melt along the way. But they then figured out that you could wrap it in gunny sacks and hay and other things, which again would act as a heat shield. And therefore, you would still get like 60% of the ice down to Delhi. And they would actually have these crushed ice sherbets. The Mughal emperors and they would actually have ice, right? And it would come from the Himalayas. I mean, imagine, right? I mean, there was no motorized vehicles. It would take like weeks for these caravans to sort of come, horses or even horse-drawn carriages to come from the Himalayas down the mountains, right? But then, yes, I mean, I recall I live in Chennai, and there's something called the ice house, where pre-electricity, I think, the ice used to come from Boston. So the funny thing, right? The tea used to go from here, and then the ice used to come from there. So there was a fascinating story of how Boston used to export ice to Chennai, and used to be stored in this ice house, which later became Vivekananda's, a place where Vivekananda stayed. So it's now called Vivekananda House, right? But it used to be the ice house during the British and East India Company's time for their, whiskeys and other things, right? Where else were they going to get ice, right?
That is crazy. And talking about this transportation, I think I heard a fascinating story about how Babar was a big fruit person, and he wanted to get fruit from Samarkand. I think that's where he was from. And
he's from Uzbekistan. Yes.
Yeah, and he was not able to, because they would go bad by the time they reached, and that's how murabba came.
Yes. Yeah, the dry fruits, the whole idea of. So in fact, I think in the Babarnama, he's like pretty brutal about the fact that he found everything in India not to his liking, right? The food, everything. I mean, he found the culture, everything not to his liking. Right? He wasn't a fan, right? But it's interesting. But by the time of his grandson, I mean, they were like absolute, complete locals, right? And the interesting thing is, by Jahangir or Shah Jahan, they were more than 80 or 85, more than 75% Rajput, right? Because only through the father's line were they Mughals. Through the mother's line, they were all. So by the time of Shah Jahan, is the son of the son of a Rajput, the grandson of a Rajput, the great grandson of a Rajput, on entire maternal line entirely, right? So he has more Rajput genes in him than he has, Babar's genes, right? So it is this is something that I think sometimes Indians forget, right? When in our nationalistic drive to somehow consider the Mughals to be not Indians, they were about as Indian as it gets, right? Because I think there's a distinction between a Mahmud of Ghor or Ghazni, who came to loot, destroy, and take everything and go back, versus people who basically just lived here. They built the civilization. A whole bunch of court systems, and we think the British set it all up. No. The British expanded and extended what the Mughals had already done in terms of tax collection, in terms of courts, right? I'm always reminded of how, in as far down south as Tamil Nadu, right? Consider every legal term in Tamil. I'll give you some examples. The word for resignation is Rajinama. I'm sure even Malayalam is something similar, right?
Raji.
It's
Raji. Rajikatta means
Right.
a resignation letter. Yeah.
So it's Raz-e-nama. So it is again a Persianized Mughal term for a resignation, right? Vakil, right?
Right.
Kacheri. All of these are so it is pretty evident that I think so that's I know it's a bit of a sidetrack, but it's always fascinating to me that people sometimes forget that they're as Indian as you can get. Yes, maybe some ancestor came, yes, and did some destruction, etc. But right, I mean, people forget that. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I have always wondered why courts are also called kacheri and the Carnatic concerts are also called kacheri.
That I don't quite know, but I have a feeling that I think probably those buildings may have been called that, but I'm not entirely sure. Because I think they had sort of like an audience and a place for a gallery and so on. I think is my guess, right?
Probably,
Originally,
yeah.
I think they would have been smaller, more court chamber like things. We also call it a chamber orchestra, the lawyers' chambers, and so on, right? So it is probably that. But yeah, so Kacheri Road in Chennai is named after the fact that there was a court there. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and talking about Babar, I think what happened was he beat the Lodhis and but he took captive the wife of the Lodhi. And then I think she served him something Indian and he didn't like it. And
he didn't like it. And so
yeah, the food of Uzbekistan is pretty bland. Is what people say.
Yeah, so I went to a Uzbek restaurant in London, right? And the menu was actually very strangely familiar. One is that you had a lot of bread-like things that were very similar to sort of naans and kulchas. That's number one. There's also an item called plov, Plov, which is exactly what you think it is. It is a pulao. It is basically meat and rice cooked together, right? And so yeah, so I think that entire there's a lot of commonalities between the food that kind of comes from there. But yes, it's definitely less spice because I think they're also very far away from the spice, if you could say that. Of course, they use saffron and others, which are sort of more proximately available in Iran and so on, and asafoetida perhaps, which is strange. Nobody uses asafoetida except Indians. But yeah, so it's quite interesting. But yeah, you're right. I think the Babar famously did not miss the fruits of Kabul or something and Samarkand and other things, and he tried to somehow grow those trees and those apricots and things, never really did, and which had then sort of led to the whole this thing of drying those fruits and then bringing them in, and which sort of gave rise to a huge market for dehydrated fruit. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's how this whole Afghan Kabuliwala thing probably came.
Kabuliwala, right? I mean, the Kabuliwalas would come because the Mughals were willing to pay good money to buy those things. Yes.
Yeah, and murabba, I wonder how they transported it. So basically, it's like reducing fruit in a sugary syrup, like sort of like compote. Is that something?
Jam, basically. Yeah. So basically, sort of like a slightly even more low moisture jam is basically what a murabba is. Non-spreadable. Right? But yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I was also reading the fact that Mughal is actually a Persian name for Mongol. So there's some relationship between Mughals and Mongols.
No, it is, right? So basically, Babar was, I think, the great-grandson of Taimur. Taimur of Uzbekistan, right? So Taimur, the lame, again, well invaded, did lots of damage here. And I recall the needlessly stupid controversy around Saif Ali Khan and Kareena Kapoor deciding to name their son Taimur. I mean, it's just a name, right? I mean, Taimur's son was called Shah Rukh, right? He was also a big conqueror. So you're going to go after Shah Rukh Khan? No, I mean, it's just a name. They have very few names in general, right? In any case, that apart, right? So Taimur, so he was the great grandson of Taimur, right? One of the great. And Taimur was, at least he was believed to have been the great grandson of Genghis Khan. So Taimur was clearly more obviously sort of more the Turkic Mongol. So it's interesting thing. There's one of the another common misconception people have is that people don't realize that Genghis Khan was not Muslim. The word Khan means king. In pretty much huge parts of Central Asia, the word Khan means king. Right? Khan is not a religious term. Khan just means king, right? So Genghis Khan was actually he basically followed a bunch of those animist local kind of Mongol steppe sort of religions. one of his great grandsons, I think, or grandson, one of them, right, was the first to embrace Islam, and then sort of, and since then, I think then Timur and others were obviously very specifically, out to spread the word of God and so on, right? So I think it was different by then, but Genghis Khan himself was not. So the Mongol is basically just the Mughal is basically just the Persian way of saying Mongol.
Yeah. And I think, the influence that they have had on Indian food is also quite remarkable, right? I mean, we spoke about murabba, kulfi, and I think even yogurt
using dry fruit paste, using yogurt in cooking, right? Because I think famously Ayurveda does not allow you to mix yogurt with anything else. And so clearly, I think the use of yogurt-based gravies, the kadis, and all the rest of those things, along with your use of cashew paste, almond paste, pistachio paste, use of saffron, all of these things were introduced. Mughlai cooking in general, I think although interestingly enough, the tandoor likely goes back like thousands of years. The tandoor has been around for like the longest time. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, talking about the cashew paste and do they use pistachio paste? Probably not. But anyway, so cashew paste is what distinguishes
almond and cashew by the rich, melon seeds by the poor. Basically.
Yeah, apparently that's what makes it shahi. Is what people say. Like you mix cashew paste and it's shahi.
Yeah. Shahi, right? Because it's only for the rich, right? And very much. And interesting thing is that they got their rich and creamy textures from these things. And then what is interesting is that you had the poorer people who could not afford fresh cream or cashew paste and pistachio paste and almonds and all that. Eventually, in the streets of Delhi around Jama Masjid, figured out a way to slow cook some of the poorest cuts of meat, particularly mutton with the bones. And then the marrow and the connective tissue would completely sort of become gelatin, which then adds the super rich and creamy texture to those dishes. And these are called niharis, right? And it is considered to be one of the most sort of nutritious, but rich tasting, but very working class food, right? So it's a classic case of, the emperor just across in the Red Fort was eating cashew paste and almond paste, but just like 500 meters away, they were cooking like bone marrow and the cheapest cuts of bone and so on, and really cooking it down to gelatin and making this incredibly thick tasting. And the funny thing now, today, if you take a Shahi Mughlai sort of dish and have a nihari on the side, the nihari is just way better, right? Just like, sort of sometimes how working class, innovation over time, right? Amongst creativity amidst duress and so
on. Interesting. We touched on kebabs, we touched on chaats, and now coming to desserts. Did you try a lot of sweets, baked items?
I'm not much of a, strangely enough, I'm not much of a dessert person at all. So really, I think other than the usual occasional firni here and there, I think I really didn't try any of the local desserts. More interesting, I did try a lot of the local breads, like, the shirmal, the Khamiri roti, and so on. Those are like, oh man, and there are all these bakeries where you could just simply make the side dish at home, and you could just go buy fresh baked Khamiri roti, right? And then come home, and you don't have to make that bread at home. And you can't actually, right? I mean, you'd have to yeast. It's a lot of effort, and you need a tandoor, which you probably don't have at home. And it's interesting because I think the part of the reason why I think yeasted breads are not more popular than they could have been is the fact that because they are impractical to make at home, you'd imagine that, okay, that would open up a market where bakeries would make it and people would just go buy it. But unfortunately, Hindus do not, till very recently, do not eat food cooked by other people, right? So somebody from another caste. And so therefore, so there's no such thing as a restaurant buying food from elsewhere. No, right? It has to be cooked at home. That's just the way it is, right? And something as staple as bread, chapati and so on, no, you make it at home. So therefore, it's only the flat bread, the chapati, the paratha, the things that you can bake at home, right? As opposed to the naans and the kulchas and these are very much street food based. They do require a tandoor, they do, and so on. and they're largely patronized by historically either typically the Muslims, right, and not by Hindus, right? So
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think that part of the country also has different types of parathas and rotis, like you mentioned, which are
yes,
not that mainstream. You don't really find all those in restaurants.
absolutely, because the restaurant is actually going to a restaurant will always prioritize things that are cheap and easy to cook. And anything that takes extra effort, I think, adds cost. And so you'll find that they do not opt for things that are high effort.
Hmm. And for someone who wants to visit Lucknow, would you recommend street food versus, like a sit-down restaurant? Like, what is the difference in?
Both.
Hmm.
Both. I think the one is that I think the quality of food even in a very dingy looking place is very high. And so I think you should just experience everything. But there are also some fantastic fine dining places as well. I think Naimat Khana, Dastar Khan, and some of these others have like amazing high end sort of, especially the biryani is just so aromatic, right? And every morsel of rice is oozing with flavors and so on. So I think, clearly, but I would actually say if you're on a budget, you just go eat street food. I think it's just amazing.
Hmm. Yeah, fantastic. I mean, also talking about firni, I think firni, the idea of mixing rice with milk, and that was also brought by Mughals, I think.
Very much, because you are not allowed to mix rice milk with anything else in traditional Hindu cooking, right? Very, very.
Which is very
Milk
interesting
was,
because payasam
yeah.
is a very South Indian thing, and kheer also, right? So
Yes.
I wonder.
No, the key. My guess is I think the kheer probably kind of came a bit later. Is my guess. And South Indians, I don't think some of these rules didn't apply there. Right. I've often found that I think the South Indian idea of even the Ayurvedic idea of what is hot or cold varies by region. Right. It's usually one of my things when people take it very seriously. I'm like, look, how can you take it seriously when different parts of India have different rules, right? I mean, and so on. But no, but people still take it seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing about potatoes and biryani is that though we spoke about the other story, right, where the last uh, Nawab of Awadh had to eat it, whatever. But the other story is that Portuguese gave the Awadh people potatoes and chili,
Yeah.
and they quite liked
Yes.
it because chili was
Yeah.
giving spice and also a bit of color.
Yep. Yep. And I think the Awadhi food is generally spicier than Delhi food, right? Meaning hotter, more chilies than Delhi food. Delhi food is actually not high on chilies at all. But Awadhi food is actually pretty high on chilies. And again, there's again a very interesting allied story of how I think Chaat is said to have one of the stories behind Chaat is related to the polluted water of the Yamuna, and I think people were getting sick drinking the water, and I find it funny that somebody in like the 16th century was finding the water of the Yamuna polluted, and we're worried that it is polluted in the year in like 2023, right? And so to account for that, I think is how many of these Chaat items. Which essentially involved a bunch of very, very strongly antimicrobial things, right? So it involved mint, it involved spices, all of those spices, it had lots of salt, your black salt and so on. Chilies, which again are very strongly antimicrobial. And tamarind, again, make it very acidic. Amchur, again, very, very, very acidic. Lime juice, and so on. And deep fried stuff, right? So when you do this, you completely neutralize the effect of the water part of it, right? So because the Chaat is like not necessarily hot, right, and it is going to be consumed raw, so which means that the water may not have been boiled, it may have been, right, it's at room temperature and so on. So but you have all of these other antimicrobial things, hopefully they will. That's why Chaat is like always very intense and very hot and very spicy.
Yeah, very interesting, because I read somewhere that Akbar used to get water from the Ganga for his food, and I think he used some other water source for his I think desserts and stuff. Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
I'm sure. Yeah, of course. So the Mughal emperors could do whatever they wanted. But I think the other, my one of my favorite interesting anecdotes is how I think the movie Jodha Akbar, that Bollywood ahistorical, movie, which sort of shows Aishwarya Rai introducing Hrithik Roshan to vegetarian food. right? Um, so the implication is that these barbarians eat only meat, and it took a Rajput princess to introduce the glories of vegetarian food to them, and so on. The weird thing is that actually Rajputs are not vegetarians. Rajputs are famously meat eating. They eat a lot of meat. They're Kshatriyas, right? And Lal Mas, they're very, they eat a lot of meat. And bizarrely enough, Akbar was vegetarian.
Yeah.
Right. Akbar had a sort of like this, a Jain guru that he was following. He followed a lot of people, right? He was like interested in immersing himself in a bunch of these religions. And one particular very influential guy somehow convinced him to turn vegetarian. And so, so that entire scene is sort of ahistorical in more ways than one, right? If anything, Akbar would have been the one to introduce Jodha Akbar to like vegetarian food.
Yeah, I don't know if it is in Akbar Nama, but Akbar used to be vegetarian on Fridays and Sundays, and he has famously said that I don't like eating meat, but I eat meat to fight wars and like to be strong.
I suppose,
and so on. Yeah.
Yes. No, I think he later in life he became like completely vegetarian and so on. So there was so apparently under the influence of that Jain one advisor. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think Jahangir was also vegetarian for the most part, is what I've heard.
Again, as I said, none of these actually matter beyond the fact that you use it to set right some stereotypes that people sometimes tend to use.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. And talking about desserts, I think jalebi and halwa was there before the Mughals came, which is also quite fascinating. Delhi Sultanate.
Halwa, yeah, true. So halwa halwa is for sure an Ottoman Central Asian thing, right? Halwa is absolutely from there, but it may have come before the Mughals. So because I think the Delhi Sultanate has been around at least till the 12th century. So yeah, sure, one of these Turkic soldiers. Yeah, because actually I do know that, like, for example, I found out that in the 13th century there was a Pandyan civil war in the south. Okay. So I think the Pandyans were fighting. They had an internal civil war, and there was an uncertainty. And one of the Pandyans, Sundara Pandyan, right, in order to beat his other cousin or brother or whoever it was, he had heard about the fact that there were these mercenary Turkic mercenary soldiers, people from Uzbekistan who were like fierce warriors on these horses, and they fought like crazy and so on. And he hired them. So Sundara Pandyan hired Turkic mercenaries in order to win a civil war. And those people then obviously married into the locals and settled in Tamil Nadu, became Tamil over time. And they are now called Rawthers. Okay. So Rawther essentially means they actually basically originated in the Turkic mercenaries who came in the 13th and 14th century, right? And fought for one of the Pandyans. But eventually they formed their own kingdoms. I think some of them became very wealthy. I think some of the Nawabs of Arcot were Rawthers as well. And so on, right? So I think they ruled over parts, as I think there was sort of instability over different parts of Tamil Nadu and so on. So Rawther, yeah. So I think you'll see the Rawther biryani, Rawther this, Rawther. In fact, I think in many parts, I think simply refer to Muslims as Rawthers.
In Kerala, especially Palakkad,
Yeah, absolutely. That is precisely that region. Yeah, yes.
Yeah, very interesting. So other than food, I see you went to Bada Imaambara. Tell me about that. It's, I think, the second biggest or something. Has a labyrinth.
Oh wow! I mean, it's a surprisingly interesting place to go. I found it far more interesting to visit than even many other major Mughal monuments and so on. I think, and the entire labyrinth was just so
quite underrated.
Quite underrated, and it is such a the guy will take you through those labyrinth, and for a moment he'll just let you go and disappear, and he'll say you try and figure your way out, and somehow he'll make a comeback before people descend into panic. And again, I think it's a remarkably underrated place, and it's a really, really beautiful place. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that it doesn't get any more crowds than it currently gets, but I think it's an amazing place. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know what.
But also there is something to be said about, I think also there's an interesting thing about how the fact that it was conceptualized as a public space, right? Not just there is a mosque that's a part of that, but the bulk of it was actually just a place for people to hang out and have fun, which actually, when you think about somebody doing this in like the 17th or 16th century, is remarkable.
Yeah,
usually India has never been a place where people built infrastructure for people to hang out and have fun. They built temples, they built like mosques, they built these kinds of things, and where you could herd people in and and do those kinds of things, but never a place where just go have fun, right?
Yeah, like a city square or a central park. Yeah,
exactly, right? No, the city square. How many Indian cities have like a city square, right? Or and so on. Of course, with the Mughals built gardens, but those were for the royalty to go and chill out, right? Yeah, not for common people.
Yeah, that is so true. I never thought about it like that. Yeah. Even the Britishers, I can't think of public gardens. Maybe Delhi.
They did not. I mean, in the sense that no. So the British was always. I mean, for starters, they were racist. So when they built public spaces, they said whites only. Right. They didn't build public spaces for brown people. Right. They even like in Chennai, Eliot's Beach. Till then, my grandmother used to tell me that before independence, Eliot's Beach in Besant Nagar was whites only. So Marina Beach was for brown people. Eliot's Beach was for Europeans only. So they didn't call it whites; they said Europeans only. And then it's only after independence that the board came off, and then people were allowed to go there.
It's actually very interesting that you mentioned this, because whenever I talk to people from Chennai, they see that, we don't go to Marina Beach, we only go to Bessie, or we only go to Besant Nagar Beach. And there's still that bit of an elitist.
Not really. It's actually now Besant Nagar Beach. There is just no breathing room on Friday, Saturday, Sundays. Like everybody is descended on Besant Nagar Beach. But I think the only advantage it has over Marina Beach is the fact that I think that the entire ecosystem around it has become entirely nice eating places and street side eating places. It's become a great place to just eat food, right? And hang out on the beach, which is something Marina has not, because I think all of the promenade is entirely like university, police headquarters, government buildings, and so there's really no, other than the shacks on the beach, there really is no place where you can just go sit in a restaurant and eat food while you can see the sea outside, which you can do in Besant Nagar. That entire stretch in front has now, all the houses have gone. They've all become restaurants. Obviously, I think it's far more lucrative. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Welcome change, for sure. Yeah, I also saw a picture of Nankhatai. I think it's also quite underrated, I feel. I mean, I love it personally, but
I find it. I think it's in my opinion, it's the right amount of biscuit to have. It's like anything more, I find it's just too much. Right? And it's also not very sweet, which I also like. Right?
Which is exactly why
it just melts in your mouth. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Any origin story? I think is it a quintessentially Indian thing, or again Mughal?
I am not really sure. Again, as someone who has very little interest in anything remotely desert-like, I did not investigate the origin of Nankhatai. It's just wanted to try it out, and
yeah. I was actually researching about some interesting desserts in UP, and I don't know. Again, I don't know how true it is, but Shah Jahan apparently wanted something as similar to Taj Mahal, and that's how Agra Petha came about.
Oh, I see. I'm not a fan of Agra Petha either. Oh, that actually does remind me. There was actually a Malai, and I forget this name. It had a pan flavor. It was Malai based. It was this dessert in this very famous desert place in Agra, which I think I'd shared as well. I mean, it was almost like a very Indian dulce de leche, like multiple layers of milk related things. But it had like a bit of that pan flavor as well. And so it's just, it was really, really elevated that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Galori, I think it was called. Pan ki galori. Yes.
Pan ki galori. Yeah. I recently discovered, I mean, sadly, after moving to the Bay Area, that meetha pan flavor in ice cream actually goes really well. At least
absolutely.
Yeah.
Pan ice cream is one of the best flavors. I also like, I think, tender coconut, I think, is also very, very nice. But it works well if it's like made genuinely with like fresh coconut, right? I mean, not one of those synthetic flavor type things. And the other one, actually, really underrated one is jackfruit.
It's called vegetarian's meat or something. Yeah.
No, jackfruit ice cream. Jackfruit flavored.
Jackfruit. Okay.
Chakka flavored. Sort of like a ice cream version of your chakka variety. Is just fantastic. And then likewise, I think there is also the custard apple. Your sitafal flavored ice cream is also super. Yes. Sort of reminds me of chapati. I think they have all of these flavors in kulfi.
Yeah. Oh, sitafal reminds me of something that I saw that you discovered near Nagarkoil. Very interesting fruit, which was like sitafal.
Not like sitafal. It's like so it's called ayani chakka, which is sort of like a baby version of a jackfruit, has like tiny jackfruit like things inside, like very delicious, and found only in Nagarkoil, Kanyakumari, and nowhere else.
That is so fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Trivandrum for a bit, and I have never come across this.
Oh no! So you'd have to go to Nagarkoil. On the road to Nagarkoil, it'll be sold.
Damn, that is so fascinating. Again, coming back.
See, again, that's an interesting thing, right? So a good chunk of Kerala's South Kerala's produce comes from Kanyakumari and Nagarkoil.
Yeah, I guess because they were all part of the same empire, Travancore, or
no, also cost of labor in Kerala and communism and all of that sort of just makes it easier to import stuff from places.
Even now, labor. For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, everything, even. I mean, all rice has been coming
like from... how I'm sure people in Palakkad are like generally procuring things from Coimbatore all the time. So it's the same thing.
Yeah. I remember a tag called Palakkad and Matta rice, and then it was written Rajamundry at the bottom. So
yes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So which is sort of how I found Rajamundry. Actually reminds me that one of the most common, if you go anywhere, if you're not by the sea, in fact, including in places which are on the coast now, the most common fish you'll get in India is basa. Okay. Which is this basically the paneer fish. This is like no flavor. And it's a catfish that comes from Vietnam. Okay. And it is farm raised, and they grow so much that they are able to ship them, pay import duties, and it is still cheaper than fish that you actually catch off the coast of your that's how much many countries have like, no, you cannot dump any more basa, right? It has become that level. Now apparently I found out that like some 15-20% of basa is now farmed in Rajamundry and Kakinada and coastal Andhra. Right? Because those guys have realized that, okay, I think I can save that whatever 50% customs duty that anyway I have to pay. Might as well sort of do it here, right?
Even cheaper.
So they've partnered with them. They've got whatever those the eggs and all of that, and they're growing it here.
That is so crazy. Yeah.
So the interesting thing, apparently, it's funny, right? For both that entire stretch from all the way from the Godavari sort of delta, Krishna delta, all the way down to the Kaveri delta. That stretch of coastline is India's highest producer of like aquaculture, basically. Shrimp and farmed fish and shrimp, right? So, in fact, you can just see units after units after units, right? And so I was told that they actually have to source those initial 12 or 13 of those sort of eggs or larvae and so on, because then they will then multiply. And these are like the genetic, this is intellectual property, right? I mean, they're like, they grow to big size and all of that, right? So, and those cost like tens of lakhs, like for some 12 larvae or something. That's your big capital investment. And then you have to hope that they will, multiply. And so on. You just have to feed them food, and then,
So this basa is probably mostly for internal consumption, right? I mean, nobody...
Yeah. It is basically the default. The moment you kind of go inland, if you see any fish item on the menu, it'll be basa. They'll say fish, Malabar fish curry, but they'll put basa. And Mallus will be wondering, what is this? Did you put paneer or something? They'll say, no, it is fish. It is basa.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. And Again, coming back to Lucknow, so Mughlai Awadhi cooking versus the typical North Indian cooking that we all know, the butter chicken and the
Yeah.
saag paneer. So that's mostly Punjab. And what can you say is the fundamental difference? Is it the sauteing of onions and tomato that forms the base versus milk cashew paste in Awadh? Is that?
Not really. I think so. A lot of your, not all your Awadh dishes are milk cashew paste based. A few of them are, right? So the white gravy ones are, right? And the other thing is that your typical Delhi butter chicken saag paneer stuff is not Punjabi either. It's actually restaurant Punjabi, and it's not even restaurant Punjabi. I mean, in the sense that these are basically sort of restaurants that started out in Lahore or Peshawar, run by these people who then post-partition came to Delhi and they just continued doing that, right?
Daryaganj, yeah.
So it's sort of like a very specific restaurant-friendly, modularized, where you can make a gravy, you can make a makhani gravy, you can make this gravy, you can make it ahead of time. You tandoori cook the chicken, next day you can use it in butter chicken, you can use it in chicken tikka masala, or kadai chicken and all of that, right? So it's very much a restaurant-friendly thing, right? If you go to Punjab, rural side of Punjab, and eat in a dhaba, it will taste absolutely nothing like what you get in a Delhi restaurant. One is it's entirely cooked in ghee or mustard oil. It depends, right, on the region. Doaba will be different, etc. Right, and then if it is sort of the Doab region, it will be the urad dal as your dal, and the makhan part of the dal makhani is not actually makhan. It is just slow cooking the dal till it sort of becomes that gelatinous thing, sort of that mucilaginous thing comes out, like it does in your bhindi and all that, right? A similar thing happens with urad dal. But in the other part of Punjab, it's going to be the green moong. They actually make a dal makhani version with the whole green moong as well, right? And it has a completely different flavor profile. There was actually a Punjabi dhaba I used to go to in Chennai. It's closed now, called the Gyan Vaishnav Punjabi dhaba. It was run by this sort of elderly Sikh gentleman. And so on. And he did not serve butter chicken. He did not serve any of your usual restaurants. These were all like hardcore sarson ka saag, like the way, Pindi chole, right? Which people forget that Rawalpindi is a Punjabi city, right? As is Lahore, as is Multan and all of those places before partition. And many of these people used to be actually from that side as well. And it tasted utterly and completely different, to the point where people would say, I don't like this. Because I am familiar with what I understood as their typical kadai chicken, kadai paneer butter masala, and this is very ginger heavy. It's very ghee heavy. It has a completely different flavor profile, and I think Awadh has a very specific, mix of spices. I think the Awadh uses more number of individual spices, and they also use more interesting floral aromas. They have like not just rose water, kevra water. There'll be like tons of flowers. They actually source these things, and they all are used in perfuming the food as well, right? And use a bunch of other very strange local roots as well that go into. I bought a bunch of these masalas. There was a Hazra Buknu masala, which I think is used as a very medicinal masala that you can sprinkle on top of sabjis apparently, and it has something called myrobalan root. And I was like, I had no idea what that was. I need to go research what that is. But it had a very interesting flavor. And so I think there are more spices used in Awadhi cooking, which sort of, again, tracks against the fact that as the more south you get, I think the more spices you are going to use, and so on.
Yeah, you spoke about Pindi Chole. I think there is another interesting story where Shah Jahan, once he was held captive at the Agra fort, had an option of eating one food for the rest of his life, and he chose chana or chole because apparently it was just like potato, right? It can be can be eaten dry like a shundal form in South India, and also in a gravy and all of that. So there's another interesting story about that.
Yes.
Awesome. So Lucknow trip, ideally, what would you recommend? 2 days, 3 days?
I would actually say, I think 3 to 4 days, I think is ideal. I think you, and the suggestion is to sort of plan it in such a way that if you're going to eat like 3 times a day, I think you get too much because the food is pretty rich and very high calorie. So you don't want to sort of plan if you're doing the kulche nihari at the Akbari gate, and so on. On that day, you probably want to have a lighter lunch, right? Don't do like biryani for lunch and so on, right? Maybe do a kebab and Rumali Roti, right? Do some sort of, you can do chaat in the evening and so on, right? So I think there are, I think there's all the famous ones. I think you should try, if you're someone with no dietary restrictions, you should try every variation, right? So there is so obviously Tunde Kababi, the famous place. You can try both. The galavati is made from mutton, right? But it can also be made from beef, which for political reasons the menu very distinctly calls it out as buff, and as opposed to beef, and so on. But yes, in my sort of experience, I found the taste of the mutton one far superior. Somehow, I think somehow the mutton in Lucknow seems to taste better. I have no idea why. I still need to figure out why. But yes, so I think you can try both, and definitely all of the other. You should try some of the. There's this other famous boti kebab, which is also again really lovely, and then definitely the biryani. I think try biryani in 2-3 different places. Fantastic, just amazing. And then chaat, and there is actually I would actually say there's a place by the Gomti River, along the side of the Gomti River, which is a food street. You just search for food street, and it is just insane. It is just like a kilometers of just every possible chaat, and one very interesting thing, soya chap, which is sort of like the Lucknow vegan sort of meat option, if you will, right? And they're famous for it. And everything that you can make with meat, there will be a soya chap version. Soya chap shaped into a shami kebab, soya chap shaped into any sort of thing. They'll make shawarma with it. I mean, you name it, right? There'll be like Mexican something kebab and something made from soya chap, and it's just an insanely crazy place for eating chaat and this kind of street food as well. So it's a food street, which I think is just search Google. You can search for it. It's just amazing. Yeah. I think my Instagram stories has all of the places that you could try. I think we tried a pretty fair mix. I think there's a few more that I think people had sent me recommendations. I will perhaps try and post another story like I did for Calicut as a Excel sheet of all the recommendations. I end up getting like hundreds and hundreds, right? So yeah, I did sort of like a pie chart of, sort of like a bar chart of which was the most recommended, right? Yeah. And for Kozhikode, it was just Paragon was like pretty much like 90%. Yeah, Paragon is, you have to try Paragon. And I think, I actually didn't know you were visiting Kozhikode for the Madhubhumi Literature Festival, and I just suggested Ada Mine Chai Kada, and it was like right across the street, right? Yeah. So Besanagar Beach has Ada Mine Chai Kada. So they have a branch there. Okay. Yeah, I think they also have. So fun fact about Ada Mine Chai Kada, I think they started in the Middle East and then they moved to Kozhikode. I see. Yeah. Like a reverse migration. Okay, I see. Yeah. Yes. Actually, Chennai has a large number of really, really good Malayali sort of food restaurants. Because I think the number of Malayalis, yes, but heavily patronized by Tamil people because they get a range of fish curries and beef and other things, and they like the flavor of those. Yes. Yeah. So I was in Hyderabad for a few months, and Kerala restaurants were really famous because people wanted to eat beef, but they could not. Yes. And they would just go to these places and, nicely. Correct. Yes. So that's, and I think also I think the typical, like, for example, I think there's a place called Kuttanad near my house. And there's the regular sadhya, which includes a couple of torans, and it comes with a sambar and a bunch of these other normal things, pulinji, normal, very lightweight, not the Onam sadhya, regular daily sadhya, etc., etc. That basic sadhya is like 70 or 80 rupees, which is insane in today's. That's like a less than $1, right, in US terms. People who just order that and then say, get me one vanjaram fry, or get me one ayala fry or something like that, and then you have your protein and you're like done, and it's very, very cheap. Of course, they will charge you 200 rupees for that fish. But yes, but the basic sadhya is like, say $80.
Yeah, that's one thing that I realized between South India and North India, right? So in South India, if you order chapati, you will get chapati and curry for like, I don't know, $50 or $60. Same with the meals that
Yes.
you were explaining. But in the
Yes.
North, if you order a curry, you have to order roti. And I found that South Indian, like restaurants in South India in general, like an average restaurant is much cheaper than the North Indian one.
I would not say that actually. In my opinion is that I think it. One is that I think more labor effort goes into making chapati, so that has to be factored into the cost of that. That's number one, right? I think you can make like a 100 kilograms of rice at very low effort. One guy can make it. There is that. The second thing I think also is that if you go to a Delhi, of course, it's going to seem expensive. But what I found is that if you go to like Lucknow or if you go to a smaller town, right, the food is remarkably cheap. But when you go to a small town in Tamil Nadu, it is actually more expensive than the small town in UP, because I think that has to do with the fact that the wealth here and the per capita income is much higher, and the expectation of the labor that you may have to pay, etc., is much higher, and so it's all factored. The other thing is that there people will eat roti and one sabji and they're done. The side basically just onions and that's it. Onion on the side, which is for free, and they just eat these three things, right? At the average meal. But the average South Indian meal will be like one rice, two sabjis, and one sambar, and one rasam, and curd, and one pickle. And so there's actually like 6 or 7 things that you end up eating, right? So the number of things you eat in a meal is very high. It's one of the things I always found like missing when I went to North India, is the fact that the people are just eating 2 things for lunch. I am used to eating like 6 things on my plate, right? And even if it's not all freshly made, the whole point was that many of these things would be in the fridge. Right, I would have made some pickle, I would have made some pachadi, I would have made some tokku, the toyal, the chembandi. All of that will be in the fridge and will be so, because there was no problem in the South of eating older food, because you would put it in the fridge and eat it. And only later I discovered that North Indians have a problem with the fridge, meaning that no, everything has to be fresh khana. It has to be made like now, and so they will never eat anything in the food. Maximum they'll have pickle. That's about it. And even their achar also, they don't put in the fridge. They keep it like outside.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, very interesting point about. Yeah, I never really thought about it. But well, Ashok, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Great stories from Mughlai cuisine and your trip to Lucknow.
We'll do great fun. Yes,
we'll do another episode soon. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, I mean, all this speak of kebabs, I'm now hungry for kebab. Pondicherry, fortunately now is like this insanely cosmopolitan place with like international. You go outside, you'll like suddenly see Europeans, you'll see people from North India, everyone, all hipsters now, right? I mean, it's way more hipster than Chennai. So I just found that there's like an Israeli restaurant nearby, and so I'm going to try it out tomorrow. Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
Yes.
Awesome.
No comment on the current
absolutely
on the current situation, which is quite a tragedy.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
Awesome. See you.